Thank you, John. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here today. I'm Janet Henderson, and I think probably the reason I'm here today is I was formerly, until quite recently, Archdeacon of Richmond. So that's in the Diocese of Ripon and Leeds, which is in the middle of the north of England. And my archdeaconry covered a huge area, about 110 miles from top to bottom and about 88 miles wide, which in British terms is very big, vast rural area. I have also been a parish priest. I've also lectured in liturgy for the Cambridge Theological Federation, and I am currently, I have a title which I can never remember. I think I'm spiritual and pastoral care manager in a hospice, which actually means I'm a chaplain in a hospice, and I also manage the social workers, the occupational therapists and the complementary therapists. So I look forward to speaking to you in a minute. So the title of my lecture today is Social Media and Enhancing Wellbeing. And I'm going to begin with a warning. Be careful what you say if you value your head. The picture is, anybody know who it is? Yeah. Anne Boleyn, second wife of Henry VIII, who apparently had a form of social media at her court. She had a commonplace book which the courtiers handed around, and they would write poems or comments and they would hand them on to the next person. They used it to flirt and all sorts of things, which I imagine was very useful to Anne. It helped to build up the relationships within her court, coming in as the second queen of Henry VIII. But, of course, we all know the story, don't we? If you know the English Reformation, it went badly wrong, and 4 of the men were arrested and beheaded for treason, and so was Anne herself. So that little experiment in social media perhaps reminds us that we do need to be careful how we use it. And I think the rule of thumb that I use is I never put anything on social media that I wouldn't feel happy to defend in front of God or in a court of law. But if you follow that fairly simple rule, I actually think that social media is an excellent way of building trust between people. And I have had absolutely no bad experiences of using social media. I have had a bad experience of the conventional press writing stories that are very badly researched, and those being taken up in digital space and going viral. But that's not, as it were, the fault of digital space. So today I'm going to talk about the use of social media to promote relationships and projects which happen in time and space. So relationships and projects which happen in time and space. Now, sometimes people make the distinction between what happens in the digital world and what happens in the real world of time and space. But I actually think that's a false distinction. I would want to argue that things that profoundly affect our lives happen in both spheres, the digital and the non-digital. And what I'm interested in is the continuity of the digital into our lived lives in time and space, and vice versa. So today I'm going to give you some examples of that continuity. But just to begin, what do I mean by social media? Well, my experience of social media is Twitter. I actually use Twitter really for sort of political purposes, so that I can follow political comment, and also so that if I write a blog post on something which is, to do with local politics, I can flag that up and people can see it. I use Facebook much more socially. I use it to keep in touch with ex-students so that I know what most of my ex-students are doing. It's extremely useful when you want to make appointments in the church, because you know who's looking for a job and who's where and who's got what sort of experience. I use LinkedIn for professional development and looking for opportunities, and opportunities to work outside the church, maybe to do something with a non-government organisation or in the non-for-profit sector that is nothing to do with church life, that actually keeps me alert to what's going on beyond the walls of the church. I've got 2 blogs, which I'll talk about later. I don't actually like Google Plus very much. I think it's scary. It makes links that you didn't authorise and you've got to really watch it, but it is interesting. And I don't know a great deal about dig and branch out. I'm just branching out into branch out at the moment. So that's what I mean by social media. I'm going to give you then 6 examples of what was achieved using social media in the 187 churches of the Archdeaconry of Richmond. And the first example is a blog that I started in 2010 called Archdeacon in the Dales. Now, this blog has certain clear themes, and that's the first thing I would say. If you're going to blog, it has to have clear themes. Why would people read it? If you can't answer that question in 30 seconds, they probably aren't going to read it. And it has certain features. One of the features of my blogs is I'm very interested in photography, so it has fairly good quality photographs. And one of the spin-offs has been that actually I've made contact with a lot of photographers, and that's been quite helpful in my ministry generally. The aims of Archdeacon in the Dales are that we would unite churches across a geographically large area. The Richmond Archdeaconry, I was responsible for about 5 dales, valleys, and each valley has its own identity, and people don't readily look beyond their own dale. And so this blog was intended to sort of unite us and give us a common identity. So it looks at life in the Yorkshire Dales and it promotes life in the Yorkshire Dales. It then explores the theological and pastoral and sometimes spiritual issues that arise from life in the Yorkshire Dales. It also promotes community projects and events, and it was very useful if a church was having events and we got to 2 days before and they hadn't sold many tickets, they could ring the office and we would blog about it, and quite often we would be able to generate a much better attendance at concerts, art exhibitions, that sort of thing. The blog also celebrates the area's natural beauty and its history, and the history goes right back. A lot of the churches are Saxon. The crypt underneath Ripon Cathedral is 672, and one of my churches actually had a Roman statue in it. So it's very deep Christian history. And also, it was intended, the blog, to integrate tourism and pilgrimage. It's only had 78 page views. I'm not really particularly interested in the size of the audience. Unlike Bishop Nick with his 1.6 million, I'm just aiming really to create small regional interest groups. So it had 78,000 page views. I didn't use Twitter or Pagebook. I began it in 2010. It snowed for 6 days in Britain, and that's unusual. In Britain, if it snows for 6 days, everything grinds to a halt. People don't go to work, schools close, and there's a crisis. So I used the crisis to sit down in front of my computer and start the blog. And I purposely didn't use Twitter or Facebook because the people I was primarily aiming at were church wardens, church officers, cautious clergy who were saying at the time, oh, you know, Facebook's a bit dangerous, and oh, Twitter's a terrible waste of time. So I thought if I start something and tell them they've all got a Twitter and Facebook, they ain't going to read it, really. So I will start a blog and I will tell them, and it's an electronic newspaper, and I will tell them that if they want to get information about what the diocese is doing or meetings or whatever, they need to read my electronic newspaper. And it works very well. And so the blog was read by people largely across the Archdeaconry of Richmond, which is, if I can just point, it's kind of this area here, right in the middle of the north of England. And I used to find it very useful because I would go along to meetings and church wardens would meet me at the door and they would say, oh, I've read your blog post on chancel repair liability or whatever it was. How interesting. And we would have a conversation. So the communities that emerged from this blog were not on Twitter and Facebook. They were sort of what I would call time and space communities of trust.